The cold of the sacrificial stones seeped through the thin silk of my gown, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn night. Above, the hunter's moon hung like a silver wound in the black sky, its light stripping the forest of its color, leaving only stark shapes of gray and bone-white. The scent of burning ironwood and sacred nightshade clogged the air, a perfume meant to honor destiny, but to me it smelled only of a gilded cage. Around the clearing the pack waited, 100 pairs of eyes, glittering like predatory stars in the gloom, all fixed on me. I was Serenia Valshore, Omega of the Blood Moon Vale, and tonight I was the offering. My breath hitched, a traitorous sound in the heavy silence. They saw me as a vessel for peace, a treaty sealed in flesh and blood, an Omega given to the strongest of the visiting Alpha Kings to quell a century of bloodshed between the Iron Fang and the Shadow Fang. My shame was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. In our world, Omegas were rare, precious things meant to soothe the primal rage of Alphas, but I felt neither precious nor powerful. I felt like a lamb, tethered and trembling, waiting for the wolf. The whispers had followed me for weeks, slithering things that spoke of my barren womb, my quiet nature, my failure to manifest a wolf of my own. A broken Omega for a broken peace, a fitting sacrifice. And as the elders' chanting reached its crescendo, I knew my fate was no longer my own. The air shifted first, a sudden sharp drop in temperature that stole the warmth from the firelight. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled wolves, a sound of reverence and fear. He moved from the shadows as if he were born of them, a wraith in the moonlight. King Kalen Voros, heir of the Shadow Fang, did not walk. He drifted, silent as snowfall, his presence a void of sound and heat. His silver hair caught the moon's glow, and his eyes, the color of a frozen lake, found mine across the clearing. There was no warmth in them, no passion, only a possessive, calculating chill that promised an eternity of winter. The pack's sense turned sharp with awe. He smelled of hoarfrost, ancient stone, and the profound loneliness of the midnight sky. He stopped before me, his shadow falling over me like a shroud. I forced myself not to flinch as he raised a hand, his long, pale fingers tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was like ice, a burn of a different kind, seeping deep into my bones. A tremor ran through me, part fear, part a strange, unwilling pull. This was the bond, the elders had said, a primal call that could not be denied. His wolf looked out from those placid eyes, a creature of patience and lethal cunning. He saw not a woman, but a territory to be claimed, a final piece in his cold, strategic game. Then the ground vibrated with a second arrival. This was no silent glide from the darkness. This was a force of nature, a conquering storm. King Malric Drosun of the Iron Fang strode into the clearing, and the very air seemed to thicken, to grow heavy with heat and raw, untamed power. His footsteps were heavy, confident, each one a declaration of his right to be here, to take what he wanted. He was a giant of a man, scarred and forged in battle, his dark hair a wild mane around a face that was more harsh angles than softness. Where Kalen was ice, Malric was fire. The scent of pine resin, hot metal, and bloodlust rolled off him in waves, a scent so potent it made my head swim. His eyes, the color of molten gold, fixed on me, and in their depths, I saw a furnace of ambition and rage. The pack growled, a low, rumbling thunder. This was not the ritual. There was to be one king, one choice, decided by the council before the ceremony. But Malric's presence here was a blatant challenge, a spit in the face of tradition. He ignored the gasps of the elders, the bared teeth of the Shadowfang warriors, and came to a halt on my other side, creating a suffocating triangle of tension. The heat radiating from his body was a stark contrast to Kalen's chill. He didn't touch my face. Instead, his calloused hand closed around my upper arm, his grip possessively firm, a brand of heat that shot straight up to my shoulder. "She is the offering," Malric's voice was a low growl, a rumble of stone on stone, "and I have come to claim her." Kalen's gaze never left my face, but a muscle feathered in his jaw. The council made its choice, Drosan. Your claim is ash. Leave this sacred ground before you stain it with your arrogance. The two forces, fire and ice, clashed over me. I was the epicenter of a storm that had been brewing for generations. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming pressure of their auras. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in the sheer weight of their predatory intent. The elders began to chant louder, desperately trying to regain control of the ceremony, their voices thin and reedy against the suffocating power of the two kings. The offering belongs to the Alpha who proves his strength, Malric snarled, his golden eyes flashing, not to the one who schemes in shadows. Without warning, they moved. It was not a choice, not a thought, but a simultaneous primal instinct. Kalen's head dipped to the left side of my neck, his cold breath ghosting over my skin. In the same impossible heartbeat, Malric lowered his head to my right, his heat scorching my flesh. My scream was trapped in my throat, a silent, desperate plea. This was wrong. This was sacrilege. The world narrowed to 2 points of agonizing pressure. Fangs, sharp as obsidian shards, pierced my skin. The pain was absolute, a blinding supernova that obliterated thought. It was not one bite, but two. 2 claims, 2 marks, laid upon me at the exact same moment. A searing agony from Malric's side, a claiming of fire and fury that sought to burn his name into my soul. A piercing, soul-deep cold from Kalen's, a brand of ice and shadow that sought to freeze me, to own me in endless silence. The 2 bonds slammed into my spirit like warring tides. Fire and ice flooded my veins, a cataclysmic battle within the confines of my body. My blood felt like it was boiling and freezing at once. One bond screamed for submission, for the heat of the pack and the glory of the hunt. The other demanded silent obedience, the cold clarity of solitude and the power of the night. They tore at each other, using my soul as their battleground. A guttural scream was ripped from my lungs as my body arched back, a vessel for a war it could not contain. The world shattered into a kaleidoscope of screaming faces, of howls that were not triumph, but pure terror. I saw the matriarch's face, a mask of horror. I saw the alphas, their eyes glowing with the feral light of their wolves, still latched onto me. Their growls a duet of damnation. My own mind was a maelstrom. 2 alpha commands were roaring inside my head, a cacophony of possession that was ripping my consciousness apart. Mine. The word was a battering ram, one forged in fire, the other in ice, and they were smashing the foundations of my being. Then, as suddenly as it began, they released me. The withdrawal of their fangs was a fresh wave of agony. I collapsed, my limbs refusing to hold me, and fell onto the cold, unforgiving stone. Darkness swarmed at the edge of my vision, a welcome relief, but I could still feel them. 2 raw, bleeding marks on my neck, each pulsing with a malevolent, opposing energy. 2 anchors in my soul, pulling me in opposite directions, threatening to tear me in two. From the fog of my fading senses, I heard the single damning word whispered by the pack, a hiss of poison that sealed my fate. Abomination. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the darkness, illuminating the frozen tableau of shock and horror. The 2 kings stood over me, their chests heaving, their wolves raging just beneath their skin. They were no longer political rivals. They were primal forces, locked in a standoff, with my broken body as the prize. Finally, the High Elder, Lyra, her face ashen and etched with ancient lines, stepped forward. She raised a trembling, gnarled hand, and her voice, though frail, cut through the tension like a blade. "This has not been seen since the age of curses," she rasped, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. 2 marks, 1 vessel. The sacred laws have been broken. The moon has been defiled. She turned her gaze from me, the cursed object on the stone, to the 2 kings whose pride had wrought this disaster. There is only one path now, one law that supersedes all others, written in blood when the first moon rose. Her voice grew stronger, ringing with the grim authority of ages. Under the next full moon, the blood moon, a trial must be held. A trial of combat, to the death. A wave of shock and brutal anticipation swept through the pack. A death duel, for me. The elder's final words fell like the executioner's axe, each one a nail in my coffin. One alpha will survive. One bond will remain. She finally looked down at me, her eyes holding not pity, but a terrible grim finality. And the Omega will belong to the victor. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a violent tide dragging me over broken glass. The first sensation was pain, sharp and specific, radiating from two distinct points on my neck. One side of my neck burned with a feverish, throbbing heat, as if a hot coal had been pressed against my skin. The other side ached with a profound, biting cold that seemed to sink into the very marrow of my bones. I lay on a bed of rough-spun linen, the scratchy fabric a minor torment compared to the war being waged in my blood. The room was dark, smelling of damp stone and stale air. A single high window, barred with iron, showed only a sliver of bruised twilight sky. This was not my chamber. This was a cell. My hand, trembling, rose to my neck. My fingers brushed against the right side first. The skin was raised, swollen, and impossibly hot to the touch. Malric's mark, a brand of possession pulsing with a restless, aggressive energy that made my own muscles twitch. It felt like a tether to a roaring furnace, a constant pull of raw, untamed power. I could almost hear a faint, furious growl in the back of my mind. A wolf pacing a cage, demanding release. My fingers then drifted to the left side. The flesh there was just as swollen, but shockingly cold. The skin taut and numb, Kaylin's mark. It felt like a shard of ice embedded in my soul, a silent, chilling claim that resonated with a stillness so absolute it was terrifying. It whispered of control, of patience, of a predator that could wait an eternity for its prey. A wave of nausea washed over me as the two opposing energies clashed within me. A fiery command to rise, to fight, to tear down these stone walls was instantly smothered by an icy wave of logic that insisted on stillness, on observation, on waiting for the perfect moment to act. The conflict was visceral, a physical sickness that left me dizzy and weak. I was a puppet with two masters, each pulling the strings in opposite directions, threatening to rip my limbs from their sockets. The heavy wooden door scraped open, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. I flinched, curling into myself on the cot, a broken thing waiting for the next blow. It was Kaylin. He entered the room and the temperature seemed to plummet further. He moved with a liquid grace, his silver hair a pale fire in the gloom, his frozen lake eyes taking in every detail of my prison, and of me. He carried no torch. The dim light from the hallway seemed to cling to him, to choose him over the surrounding shadows. He stopped several feet from the bed, his posture radiating an unnerving calm. He did not ask if I was well. He did not offer comfort. He simply observed, his gaze analytical, as if I were a fascinating but flawed specimen. The sympathetic resonance is more volatile than the ancient text suggested, he said, his voice a low melodic murmur that did not warm the air between us. One bond seeks to consume, the other to preserve. They are actively trying to destroy one another, using your life force as the fuel. He took a step closer. The scent of frost and winter night intensified, and the cold ache in my neck sharpened, a precise, stabbing pain. My teeth began to chatter. Malric is a creature of impulse, Kaylin continued, his eyes fixed on the heated mark on my right side. He acts with no thought to consequence. His fire burns hot, but it will consume its kindling quickly. You. He reached into the pocket of his dark tunic and produced a small crystalline vial filled with a liquid that swirled like liquid moonlight. He placed it on the small, rough-hewn table beside my bed. This is a distillation of moon petal and silverbark sap. It will not sever his claim, but it will cool it. It will grant you clarity. It will quiet the rage he has branded upon your soul. Clarity. He offered me a reprieve from the fire, but only to plunge me deeper into his ice. He wanted to dull one half of my torment, to give his own bond supremacy. It wasn't a gesture of mercy. It was a strategic move on the battlefield of my body. I stared at the vial, then back at him. My voice, when I finally found it, was a raw, broken whisper. And what of your mark? What will quiet the cold that freezes my heart? For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through his glacial eyes. It wasn't surprise, but perhaps appraisal. He had expected a whimpering, terrified Omega. He had not expected a question. My bond does not need to be quieted, Serenia, he said, the sound of my name on his tongue both a caress and a claim. It needs to be understood. Fire destroys, ice preserves. When this is over, you will be whole, you will be mine, and you will be silent and strong, as a queen should be. He reached out, his fingers ghosting over his mark on my neck. His touch was not meant to soothe. It was a reaffirmation of ownership. The cold plunged deeper, a paralyzing chill that stole my breath. For a terrifying second, the fiery pulse on my other side faltered, and I felt myself slipping into a void of perfect, silent stillness. I would be his porcelain doll, beautiful and unbreakable and utterly without will. Before I could recoil, he withdrew his hand and turned to leave. Take the elixir, he said over his shoulder, a quiet command. Survive until the blood moon. That is all I require of you. The door closed, plunging me back into suffocating silence, the vial of moonlight shimmering on the table like a false promise. I lay there, trembling, caught in the grip of his chilling presence long after he was gone. He didn't want a mate. He wanted a statue for his frozen kingdom. I don't know how much time passed before the door was threatened again. This time, there was no quiet entry. There was a roar of fury from the hallway, the sound of bodies hitting stone, and the splintering crash of the door being torn from its hinges. Malric filled the doorway, a primal storm of rage and power. His golden eyes blazed in the dim light, and his presence was a blast of desert heat that instantly banished the room's lingering chill. The two guards who had been posted outside lay groaning on the floor behind him. He stalked into the room, his heavy boots thudding against the stone, the scent of pine, sweat, and rage rolling off him in suffocating waves. His furious gaze swept over me, over the cot, and then landed on the crystal vial Kaelin had left. A guttural snarl ripped from his chest. With a sweep of his massive arm, he sent the vial flying. It shattered against the far wall, the silvery liquid hissing as it evaporated, leaving behind the faint cloying scent of petals. That shadow-born coward, he growled, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through my bones. He paced the small cell like a caged lion, his power too vast for the confined space. He would poison you with his frost, weaken you, make you forget what a true bond feels like. He stopped in front of me, his shadow consuming me. The heat from his body was intense, a physical force. The burning mark on my neck pulsed violently, a call in response with the alpha who had made it. He saw me flinch, saw the pallor of my skin and the tremor in my hands, but where Kaelin had seen a specimen, Malric saw a defiled prize. He touched you, he snarled, his eyes fixed on the icy mark on my left side. I can smell his soulless winter all over you. It is a stain. He knelt before the low cot, bringing us eye to eye. His proximity was overwhelming. I felt small, fragile, like a rabbit before a wolf. But this wolf was not cold and calculating. This one was all teeth and heat and a terrifying, possessive hunger. This duel is a formality, Ka. He rasped, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial intensity. His tricks and shadows are no match for Iron Fang's strength. I will tear his throat out under the blood moon, and I will be the only alpha whose name you scream. His calloused thumb brushed against my cheek, the touch shockingly rough, but sending a jolt of warmth through my chilled skin. His gaze dropped to my lips, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he would kiss me. Instead, he leaned closer, his head dipping to his mark on my neck. He didn't touch it with his hand. He nuzzled against it, his hot breath ghosting over the inflamed skin, inhaling my scent. It was an act of raw animalistic possession. "You are mine, Serenia," he murmured against my skin, the words a brand of their own. "Your fire is mine. Your fight is mine. Do not let his ice put you out." A wave of heat, powerful and dizzying, surged from his mark, flooding my system. It was agonizing, but it was also life. It was a roaring inferno that pushed back against the encroaching frost, a violent, chaotic energy that made my heart thunder in my chest. It felt like rage, like strength, like a wildness I had never been allowed to feel. He was offering me a sword, where Kaelin had offered me chains. He pulled back, his golden eyes burning into mine. "Eat!" he commanded, gesturing to a tray of untouched food by the door I hadn't even noticed. "Keep your strength. I will come for you when it is done." And then he was gone, leaving behind a whirlwind of heat, the scent of battle, and a splintered door. I was left gasping for breath, my body a war zone where the ceasefire had just been violently broken. Kaelin's cold promised a silent, controlled existence. Malric's fire promised a glorious, violent one. Both would see me utterly consumed. My gaze fell upon my reflection in a shard of the broken vial on the floor. I saw a wild-eyed creature, pale and haunted. On her neck, 2 raw emblems of her damnation. One, an angry red, looked like a stylized fang wreathed in flame. The other, a deathly pale violet, resembled a shard of ice surrounded by shadow. I am not a queen, I thought with a sudden, terrifying clarity. I am not a prize. I am the battleground. I am the territory they seek to conquer, and they will burn and freeze every part of me until nothing is left. They speak of my survival as a prerequisite for their victory, but they do not care if I survive, only that the vessel for their bond does. The realization settled not with despair, but with a spark of cold fury. It was a new feeling, born of both the fire and the ice within me. The rage of the Iron Fang, honed by the cunning of the Shadow Fang. They thought they were tearing me apart, but maybe, just maybe, they were forging me into something new, something they would never see coming. Heavy, measured footsteps approached in the hall, not the silent glide of Kaelin or the stomping fury of Malric. This was the sound of authority, of tradition, of judgment. The High Elder, Lyra, appeared in the broken doorway, her face a mask of grim resolve. She was not alone. 2 other elders flanked her, their faces equally severe. They carried not food, nor medicine, but a blackened iron bowl from which a thin wisp of smoke curled, and a long, ritualistic knife, its silver edge gleaming ominously in the torchlight. "The abomination must be cleansed, child," Lyra said, her voice devoid of all warmth. "The 2-fold mark is a curse upon this pack, an omen of our destruction. We cannot wait for the blood moon. The weaker poison must be cut out now." My blood ran cold. They weren't talking about the bond. They were talking about the flesh. They were going to carve one of the marks from my neck. The shock, the pain, it would kill me. Or worse, it would sever one bond so violently it would shatter my soul, leaving me a mindless, broken shell for the victor. Lyra took a step forward, raising the silver blade. "It is a mercy," she whispered, her eyes filled with a fanatic's pity, "to save your soul from the war that consumes it." The knife glinted, aimed not for the marks, but for the hollow of my throat. A clean cut to end it all. This was their solution, not to save me, but to erase the problem. My breath hitched. The cage of ice and fire had just become a tomb, and my executioners had arrived. The silver blade descended. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizing eternity. I saw the grim pity in Lyra's eyes, the cold fanaticism of her followers, and in that crystalline moment of terror, the warring forces inside me found a single common enemy: my survival. Malric's bond roared to life, a supernova of pure violent instinct. Fight, kill, live! It was a furnace blast of raw power that demanded I tear the knife from her hand and sink it into her heart. Simultaneously, Kaylin's bond uncoiled like a frozen serpent, a voice of absolute chilling command in the chaos. Control the outcome, do not be their sacrifice. Be the weapon. For the first time, they did not pull me apart. They converged. A soundless scream built in my chest, a pressure so immense I thought my bones would shatter. It was the howl of Malric's untamed wolf and the silent killing frost of Kaylin's shadow predator, twisted into something new, something that was mine. The air in the cell crackled, suddenly thick with an invisible energy. The burning mark on my neck blazed with agonizing heat, while the cold one bled a frost so deep it felt like it was freezing the blood in my veins. Heat met cold not within me, but outside of me. A shockwave of pure clashing power erupted from my body. It was a visible thing, a shimmering distortion of the air, like heat rising from a frozen road. A wave of searing heat and bone-splitting cold slammed into the three elders. Lyra cried out as the silver knife was torn from her grasp, flying across the room to embed itself in the wooden door. The other two were thrown back against the stone wall with enough force to make them crumple to the ground, stunned and groaning. The iron bowl of smoking herbs clattered to the floor, its contents spilling in a dark, ashen smear. The backlash threw me back against the cot, every muscle screaming in protest. A profound, aching weakness washed over me, the price of wielding such a volatile force. My vision swam with black spots, and the marks on my neck throbbed with a pain that was now 100 times worse. But the doorway was clear. My own instincts, a fledgling will born in the heart of their storm, screamed one word: run! I scrambled from the cot, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. I didn't look back at the stunned elders. I stumbled over the threshold, past the groaning guards Malric had dispatched, and into the cold, empty corridors of the lower fortress. Every shadow seemed to leap out at me. Every distant shout seemed to be a pursuit. The warring commands were a dull roar in my head now, a headache of fire and ice, but the singular purpose of escape was a sharp, clear signal through the noise. I found a side door, unbarred, leading to the kitchens. From there, it was a desperate dash through the smells of old smoke and discarded vegetable peels, and out into the night. The cold air hit my face like a slap, shocking my senses into sharp focus. I was behind the fortress, at the edge of the great dark expanse of the Whisperwood. Freedom and death in equal measure lay beneath its shadowed canopy. Without a second thought, I plunged into the trees. The forest swallowed me whole. Branches clawed at my thin gown, tearing the silk. The frozen mud of the forest floor sucked at my bare feet, chilling me to the bone. I ran blindly, fueled by adrenaline and terror, the twin pains in my neck a hellish guide. The fire drove me forward, a relentless engine of panic and fury. The ice sharpened my senses, making me acutely aware of every snapping twig, every hoot of a distant owl, every rustle in the undergrowth that might signal a pursuer. After what felt like an eternity, my body gave out. The last dregs of my strength vanished, and I collapsed at the base of an ancient moss-covered oak. Sobs racked my body, harsh, tearing sounds in the quiet of the woods. I was lost. I was hunted. My own pack wanted me dead, and the two alphas who had caused this wanted me as a spoil of war. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I pressed my cheek against the damp, cold bark of the tree, trying to ground myself. The scents of the forest were overwhelming: damp earth, decaying leaves, the sharp, clean scent of pine. But under it all, I could smell myself. The scent of fear, of blood from the scratches on my arms, and a confusing, warring scent of frost and embers that clung to me like a shroud. I was a beacon in this forest, an olfactory paradox that any shifter would be able to track for miles. Malric's bond pulsed, urging me to find a cave, a defensible position, to turn and face my hunters with bared teeth. They will see you as prey. Show them the predator. Kalen's was a counter-whisper, a chillingly logical strategy. Climb, water, mask the scent. High ground offers sight. Silence is your shield. For the first time, I made a choice that wasn't just a reaction. I chose a piece of both. I used the aggression Malric's bond gave me to push through the pain, to get to my feet. I used the cunning from Kalen's to find a small rushing stream, its water so cold it stole my breath. I waded into it, letting the current wash the mud and blood from my feet and legs, hoping it would carry my scent away. I followed the stream deeper into the woods, moving with a newfound stealth, my steps more deliberate, my breathing controlled. I was learning, I was adapting. The moon broke through the clouds, bathing the small clearing I'd stumbled into with ethereal light. I was exhausted, shivering, my torn gown offering no protection from the cold. The pain in my neck was a constant, debilitating throb. I sank to my knees in a patch of soft moss, the fight finally leaving me. I could run no further. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Every instinct screamed, a cacophony of fire and ice. But there was nothing, only the deep, impenetrable shadows of the ancient wood. Then he was simply there, not stepping from the shadows, but coalescing out of them, as if the darkness itself had given him form. Kalen stood at the edge of the clearing, his silver hair like spun moonlight, his eyes holding the chilling depth of a frozen abyss. He was not breathing heavily. His clothes were not torn. He looked as if he had simply taken a quiet stroll through the woods and happened upon me. The cold mark on my neck flared with a sudden, intense ache, a shock of absolute zero that made me gasp. An impressive display of chaotic energy, he said, his voice the same calm, melodic murmur as before. It did not belong in this wild place. You shattered the radial cartilage of one elder and fractured the clavicle of another. Lyra will not be able to hold a knife for some time. He knew. Of course he knew. He saw everything. My desperate act of survival was, to him, a mere data point to be analyzed. They tried to kill me, I whispered, my voice raw. They tried to correct a sacrilege, he countered, taking a slow, deliberate step into the clearing. Their methods were crude, but their reasoning was sound, from their perspective. You are an imbalance, a threat to the old ways. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in my shivering form, my torn clothes, my bleeding feet. There was no pity in his eyes, but there was something else, a flicker of intense, focused interest. And you are far more than they believed you to be. He crossed the remaining distance between us in a silent drift. I flinched as he knelt before me, the cold radiating from him a palpable thing. The scent of winter and stone filled my senses, and I felt the fiery bond from Malric recede, suppressed by his proximity. He is a wildfire, Kalen said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on Malric's blazing mark. He will burn you down to ash just to claim what is left. He offers you rage. I offer you control. Before I could react, he reached out. His fingers, long and cold, did not touch his own mark. Instead, they went to the angry, burning brand Malric had left. I braced myself for pain, for a new kind of violation, but his touch was unexpectedly gentle. A wave of profound cold emanated from his fingertips, sinking into my skin. It was not the painful, soul-deep chill of his bond, but a controlled, therapeutic cold. It leached the feverish heat from Malric's mark, reducing the violent, throbbing agony to a dull, manageable ache. The relief was so sudden, so absolute, that a sob escaped my lips. For the first time since the marking, one half of my body was not on fire. The inferno raging in my blood was dampened, leaving a strange, hollow quiet in its wake. I looked up at him, confused, my breath catching in my throat. This was an act of mercy. It was a gesture so at odds with the cold, calculating king I had seen that it left me reeling. His frozen lake eyes met mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw past the alpha, past the air, and saw something ancient and deeply lonely. Fire forges the blade, he whispered. His voice so quiet, it was almost lost to the sounds of the forest. But it is the ice that gives it an edge. It is the ice that makes it hard enough to shatter stone. He was not just talking about weapons. He was talking about me. He didn't want to extinguish Malric's fire. He wanted to temper it, to use it, to shape me into something that could withstand both their bonds. A blade, his blade. His thumb brushed my lower lip, a fleeting icy touch that sent a shiver through my entire body. It was a touch that spoke not of passion, but of artistry, of a sculptor assessing his marble. The moment of strange, terrifying intimacy was shattered by a sound that ripped through the night. It was a roar of pure, untamed fury, a sound that shook the trees and sent birds scattering from their branches. It was a sound I knew in the very marrow of my bones. The scent of pine and burning rage hit me a second before he did. Malric burst into the clearing, a force of nature, his golden eyes blazing with feral light. He was in a partial shift, his features elongated, claws extending from his fingertips, his teeth sharp. He saw Kaelin kneeling before me, his hand on my neck, and the low growl in his chest escalated into a deafening snarl. "Get your hands off her, shadow spawn." Malric was a tempest of unrestrained wolf, all instinct and violent intent. He launched himself across the clearing, not as a man, but as a projectile of muscle and fury. The ground trembled under his charge. The air crackled with the sheer force of his rage. The fiery mark on my neck, which Kaelin's touch had soothed to a dull ember, erupted back to life, a searing brand of agony that mirrored the alpha's own fury. It was a vicious feedback loop. His rage ignited my mark, and my pain seemed to fuel his rage. Kaelin moved with an economy of motion that was both beautiful and terrifying. He didn't meet the charge head-on. As Malric's claws swiped at the space where he had been, Kaelin was already a foot to the left, rising to his full height in a single fluid motion. He used Malric's own momentum against him, a hand on the charging alpha's shoulder, redirecting the attack so that Malric slammed into the ancient oak behind me instead of through me. The impact shook the very roots of the tree. Leaves and twigs rained down around us. "Your solution to everything is brute force, Drosin." Kaelin's voice was as calm and cutting as a shard of ice. "You would have torn her in two to get to me." Malric spun around, his golden eyes incandescent, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "She is mine. My mark burns on her. Your filthy ice has no place near her." He was speaking to Kaelin, but his possessive gaze was locked on me, a furnace of raw ownership that was as terrifying as it was potent. He saw my torn gown, the scratches on my skin, the terror in my eyes, and his rage seemed to find a new, sharper focus. "What did you do to her?" "I did what you are incapable of," Kaelin replied. His posture relaxed, yet radiating a coiled tension, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "I offered balance. You offer only destruction." They circled each other, a dance of fire and ice around the small fire of my own being. The clearing, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, was now a cage. The bars forged from their suffocating auras. The heat from Malric made the air thick and hard to breathe. The cold from Kaelin leached the warmth from my skin, making my teeth chatter. I was trapped between two opposing forces of nature, and I felt as fragile as a leaf caught in a whirlwind. "Balance?" Malric laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You call your chilling control balance? You would turn her into one of your frozen statues? A pretty ornament for your silent throne. I'll give her a crown of fire, a kingdom worthy of a true mate." "She will be ash before she can wear it," Kaelin stated, the words simple, factual, and utterly damning. He took a half-step back, placing himself subtly between me and Malric. It wasn't a gesture of protection for me, I realized with a sickening lurch. It was a strategic positioning. He was guarding his asset. The standoff was broken by a sound that did not belong to their primal conflict. It was the clear, commanding call of a hunting horn, echoing through the whisperwood. It was followed by another, and then another from different directions. The pack. They were not just searching for me, they were hunting, and the disciplined, organized sound of the horns meant it was not a panicked search party. It was the enforcers, the pack's martial arm, led by Lyra's fanatical decree. The immediate threat of their own conflict was instantly overshadowed by the greater one. If the enforcers found us, they would see two rival alphas fighting over a cursed omega. It would be chaos, bloodshed, and an execution. My execution? Malric's partial shift receded, his features becoming more human, though the feral blaze in his eyes did not dim. He looked from the direction of the horns to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than rage or possession in his gaze. It was a grim, strategic calculation. "We have to move," he snarled, taking a step toward me. "Move where?" Kalen's voice was sharp. "They will have the territories surrounded. Your scent is a beacon of rage that they can follow for miles. Hers is a paradox of fire and ice that will draw them like moths to a cursed flame." My blood ran cold. He was right. There was nowhere to run. A sudden sharp pain lanced through my head, a spike driven directly into my mind. It was Kalen's bond, not a whisper this time, but a direct, intrusive thought, cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "There is a place. The old ways, the moon paths, but I cannot navigate them while fending him off. You must create a diversion." Before I could even process the silent command, Malric was at my side. He grabbed my arm, his grip hard and bruising, and started to pull me toward the deeper shadows of the wood. "This way, the caves by the Black River will hide our scent." His plan was simple, direct, and predictable. The caves would be the first place the enforcers would look. Kalen's thought echoed in my mind. Predictable, a trap. I had a choice, a real one for the first time. I could go with the fire, with the raw strength that promised a ferocious, bloody stand against our pursuers, or I could trust the ice, the cunning strategy that spoke of hidden paths and ancient secrets. The burning mark on my neck pulsed, demanding I follow its alpha, that I submit to his strength. The icy mark remained quiet, a silent pressure in my soul waiting for my decision. I planted my feet. Malric stopped, tugging at my arm. He turned to look at me, his eyes narrowed in confusion and irritation. "Serenia, now is not the time for fear. We move or we die." I looked from his blazing golden eyes to Kalen, who stood perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask of glacial calm. I was a bridge between them, a conduit, and I was about to choose a direction. I pulled my arm from Malric's grasp. The rejection was a physical shock that passed between us. His eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief and wounded pride in their depths. I turned to Kalen. "The moon paths," I whispered, the words feeling alien on my tongue, as if they were spoken by someone else. I didn't even know what they were, but his silent command had planted the knowledge in me. Kalen's expression did not change, but I saw a subtle shift in his stance, a fractional release of tension. I had made the correct strategic choice. My value had just increased. Malric's face darkened, a thundercloud of fury and betrayal. "What foolishness is this? You would trust the whispers of a snake over the strength of a wolf?" he roared. "There are no moon paths. They are old wives' tales, stories to scare pups." "They are real," Kalen said, his voice cutting through Malric's rage. "And they are our only hope. They are hidden ways, woven into the fabric of the old magic, visible only under the moon's light to those who know how to look." He turned his gaze to me. "And whose bond is attuned to the silent and the unseen." The horns sounded again, closer this time. We were out of time. "Fine," Malric snarled, the sound a deep threat. "Lead the way, Shadow Walker, but if this is a trick, your throat is mine, path or no path." Kalen ignored him. He moved to a place in the clearing where the moonlight fell thick and white, pooling on the mossy ground like spilled milk. He gestured for me to come to him. I hesitated for only a second before moving to his side. The cold from his body was a familiar shield now, a strange comfort against the chaos of the hunt. "The paths are not of earth and stone," Kalen murmured, his voice for me alone, They are of shadow and light, of memory and intent. They will feel wrong, disorienting. Your bond to me will be your anchor. Do not fight it. Let it guide you through the disorientation. He placed his hand on the small of my back, his touch a point of absolute cold that seemed to focus my scattered senses. He looked at the pool of moonlight, and for the first time, I saw a change in his eyes. The ice in them seemed to fracture, revealing a swirling silvery light, like the reflection of stars on a frozen lake. Now, Dro-san, Kalen said, his voice resonating with a strange power. Create your diversion. We need 30 seconds of absolute chaos. Malric stared at him, his pride warring with the grim reality of our situation. Then, a slow, predatory grin spread across his face. Chaos was his element. He threw his head back and let out a full-throated alpha roar, a declaration of war that was answered by a chorus of furious howls from the approaching enforcers. He then charged, not at us but in the opposite direction, a blur of motion crashing through the undergrowth, deliberately making as much noise as a whole pack of wolves, drawing our pursuers away from the clearing. Hold on, Kalen whispered. The world dissolved. As Kalen guided me into the pool of moonlight, the solid ground beneath my feet gave way to something else. It was like stepping into water and air at the same time. The forest I knew, the trees, the moss, the scent of pine, vanished, replaced by a landscape of shimmering silver light and flowing river-like shadows. The air was thin and cold, and the only sound was a faint high-pitched hum, like a distant star singing. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, my human senses completely unable to process the non-space we were in. The bond to Kalen was the only real thing. It was a line of cold, clear certainty in the swirling chaos, a tether back to reality. I clung to it, focusing on the icy mark on my neck as he guided us through the impossible landscape. We were moving at an incredible speed, the silver and black scenery blurring past us. It felt like we were walking on the moon's reflection in a still pond. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. We stepped out of a shadow and back into solid reality. The world slammed back into place with a jolt that made my stomach heave. I stumbled, and Kalen's arm was there, steadying me. We were on a high, wind-swept cliff face, overlooking the entire valley. The Whisperwood was a dark carpet below us, and the fortress was a distant toy. In the woods, I could see the flickering lights of torches, a scattered constellation of our pursuers, miles away now, still following the false trail Malric was laying. We were safe, for now. I pulled away from Kalen, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the path. What was that? I gasped, looking back at the solid rock behind us. There was no shimmering portal, no hint of the impossible path we had just taken. The old magic, Kalen said, his voice holding a trace of something I couldn't identify. Reverence? Regret? My lineage has a closer tie to it than most. It is why they call us Shadow Fangs. He looked out over the valley, his profile sharp and unforgiving against the moonlit sky. And it is why I will win this duel. Malric's strength is of the flesh, mine is of the earth and the shadows themselves. He believed it, absolutely. He saw this not as a fight for a mate, but as a confirmation of his inherent superiority. A howl, faint with distance but filled with raw, triumphant fury, echoed up from the valley below. Malric. He was still out there fighting, leading them on a wild chase, buying us this time. A part of me, the part branded by his fire, felt a surge of pride and a pang of worry. He was a force of nature, but he was not invincible. I looked at Kalen, this creature of ice and secrets, who had saved us with magic I never knew existed. I looked toward the dark woods that held Malric, the wolf of fire and blood who had risked himself for our escape. 2 kings, 2 bonds, and me standing on a precipice between them, seeing for the first time that this was not just a battle of strength, but a war of ideologies, of magic, of worlds. Kalen turned his gaze from the valley to me. The starlight seemed to catch in his eyes, and the calm, analytical mask was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, unnerving intensity. "Now you see," he said, his voice a low whisper that wrapped around me like a winter fog. "There is no choice between us. There is only the inevitable outcome." He took a step closer, and the mark on my neck ached with a deep, resonant cold. "The blood moon will rise, and it will anoint its true king, and you, Serenia, will be the one to crown him." The sanctuary Kaelin had found for us was a place outside of time. It was a shallow cave carved into the cliff face, hidden behind a curtain of petrified vines that looked like grasping skeletal fingers in the moonlight. The entrance was so narrow we had to enter sideways, and inside the air was still and cold, carrying the ancient scent of dry stone and forgotten dust. From here, the world was a map, spread out below us. We could see the lights of the hunt moving through the forest, hear the faint echoes of their calls, but we were untouchable, spectral observers on our rocky perch. Malric's distant, defiant howls had faded. An uneasy silence settled in the cave, broken only by the whisper of the wind over the cliff's edge. I huddled against the far wall, wrapping my arms around myself, the torn silk of my gown, a pathetic defense against the biting cold. Kaelin stood at the cave mouth, a silent sentinel cloaked in shadow, his gaze fixed on the valley. He seemed to draw strength from the night, from the cold stone, while I felt it seeping into my bones, leaving me brittle and exhausted. The adrenaline of the escape was gone, replaced by a deep, aching weariness. The 2 marks on my neck were a constant, throbbing reminder of my fractured state. Kaelin's mark felt at home here, a quiet, humming core of cold that resonated with the ancient stone around us. Malric's, however, was a caged, restless thing. It pulsed with a frustrated, frantic heat, a desperate call for its alpha, a furious protest against this cold, silent prison. The conflict was no longer a violent battle, but a grueling war of attrition that was slowly grinding my spirit to dust. "He is leading them toward the Iron Fang border," Kaelin said without turning. His voice was a quiet murmur, yet it filled the small space. A predictable but effective tactic. The enforcers will not risk a territorial war. They will abandon the hunt soon. I said nothing, merely hugged my knees tighter. His strategic assessment of the man who was, at that moment, risking his life for us was chilling. There was no gratitude, no respect for a fellow alpha's strength, only analysis. He finally turned from the entrance, his pale eyes finding me in the gloom. He moved toward me, his steps making no sound on the rock floor. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over me, clinical and detached. "You are shivering," he stated. It was not an expression of concern, but an observation of fact. "Your body is wasting energy it needs to sustain the warring bonds. The fire within you is fighting the ambient cold. It is an inefficient system." He shrugged off his own heavy dark tunic. It was made of some fine, thick wool that seemed to drink the shadows. For a moment I saw the lean, powerful lines of his torso, pale skin stretched taut over a warrior's muscles. He was not built with the raw, brute power of Malric, but with the deceptive whipcord strength of a predator built for speed and killing precision. He tossed the tunic to me. It landed in my lap, heavy and smelling of frost, night air, and his own unique stony scent. I hesitated, my fingers brushing against the fabric. Taking it felt like an acceptance, an alignment, but the cold was a gnawing pain now, and my own pride was a poor shield against it. I pulled the heavy tunic over my head. It was huge on me, swallowing me in its warmth-stealing darkness. The scent was overpowering, a direct infusion of his essence. The icy mark on my neck seemed to sing, a low thrum of contentment that sent a shiver of a different kind through me. It felt like a surrender. "Better," he said, a quiet note of satisfaction in his voice. He sat down across from me, leaning his back against the opposite wall of the cave, his long legs stretched out. The space was so small that his feet were only inches from mine. This proximity was an entirely different kind of intimacy from the violent possession of Malric. It was quiet, invasive, a slow creeping colonization of my senses. The blood moon is in 3 nights, he said, his voice a low, meditative rumble. When it rises, we will meet them on the plains before the old temple. It is neutral ground decreed by the first laws. Malric will be there, the duel will be fought, and this will end. He spoke of the coming duel as if it were a foregone conclusion, a final necessary piece of a grand cosmic equation that only he could see. You speak as if you cannot lose, I whispered, my voice muffled by the high collar of his tunic. His lips curved in a faint, chilling smile. It did not reach his eyes. Every battle is won or lost before the first blow is struck, Serenia. It is won in the mind. Malric thinks with his blood, with his wolf. His rage is his strength, but it is also his greatest weakness. He will come at me with all the force of a tidal wave. He paused, his gaze becoming distant, as if he were already seeing the fight unfold. But even the strongest wave breaks against the cliff. His certainty was absolute and terrifying. He was the cliff, unmoving, unfeeling, patient, waiting to break the raw, beautiful power of the wave. I thought of Malric's fiery passion, his possessive heat, the wild, chaotic life that blazed in his eyes, and I imagined it all being extinguished against the unyielding ice of Kaelin's will. A profound, unexpected sadness washed over me. I was bound to both of them, and the thought of either one of them being destroyed felt wrong. It felt like a part of me would die with them. And what happens after? I asked, my voice barely audible. To the loser's pack? To the bond? The Iron Fang will be absorbed into the Shadow Fang lands. My rule will be absolute. It is the only way to ensure a lasting peace. He looked at me, his eyes piercing the gloom, holding me captive. And the bond, your bond to him, will be cauterized. When his life is extinguished, the mark will fade to nothing more than a scar, a remender of a war that has been won. A scar. A pale, dead thing on my neck to mirror his own living, breathing claim. I would be his, wholly and completely, with only a ghost of the fire that had once raged within me. I would be his balanced, silent, perfect queen. The thought was so bleak, so empty, it felt like a death in itself. Something inside me, a fledgling spark of defiance that was neither Malric's fire nor Kaelin's ice, but my own, rebelled. You speak of me as if I am a territory to be conquered, I said, my voice gaining a surprising strength. A throne to be won. Do I have no say in this? Am I nothing more than the spoils? Kaelin was silent for a long moment. He studied my face, his expression unreadable. I expected him to dismiss my question, to state the obvious law that I belonged to the victor, but he did not. You were an offering, he said slowly, his voice losing some of its sharp analytical edge. A political pawn, a vessel for a treaty. That is what you were meant to be. He leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the small space, his gaze intensifying. But that is not what you are. The twofold mark, the clashing bonds. They should have destroyed you. A lesser Omega would have been torn apart. Her mind shattered within the first hour, but you endured. You survived the elders, you harnessed that chaotic energy and used it as a weapon. You ran. You chose a path. He paused, and his next words landed with the weight of prophecy. You are not the prize, Serenia. You have become the crucible. The outcome of this war is being forged within you. I stared at him, my heart hammering. He saw it. He saw the change in me, the forging of a new will in the heart of his and Malric's storm. But he did not see it as a threat. He saw it as a tool. He believed he could control it, that my nascent strength would ultimately align with his own. He was tempering his future queen. The hours crept by in silence. I must have drifted into an exhausted, shallow sleep, because I was startled awake by a subtle shift in the air. Kaelin was on his feet, standing at the cave mouth again, his body rigid. He is here, he said, his voice a low warning. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a wild, traitorous relief. I peered around the edge of the rocky entrance. Far below, at the base of the cliff, a lone figure was climbing. He moved with a reckless, powerful grace, finding handholds and footholds in the sheer rock face that seemed impossible. It was Malric. He was battered, his clothes were torn, his face was smudged with dirt and streaked with dried blood from a cut on his forehead. But he was alive, and as he drew closer, I could see the triumphant, feral grin on his face. He'd outrun them all. He'd fought and bled and won. He hauled himself over the final ledge and onto our perch, his chest heaving. His golden eyes immediately found me, and his grin widened. He took in the sight of me, swallowed in his rival's tunic, and his expression soured, the grin vanishing into a dangerous snarl. The heat from his body was a furnace blast after the cave's chill. The burning mark on my neck flared to life, a joyous, painful beacon welcoming its alpha home. "I can smell his stench all over you," he growled, stalking toward me. He ripped the tunic from my shoulders, tearing the fabric in his haste. He threw it to the ground at Kaylin's feet. "She is not your shield against the cold, Wraith." He stood before me, his powerful presence a suffocating blanket of heat and possession. His hands came up to frame my face, his callous thumbs brushing away the grime from my cheeks. His touch was rough, impatient, but there was an undercurrent of desperate relief in it that made my breath catch. "Did he hurt you?" he demanded, his golden eyes scanning me for any sign of injury, his gaze lingering on the icy mark on my neck, as if he wished he could burn it away with his stare alone. "I am fine," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He is the reason you are alive," Kaylin's voice cut in, cold and sharp. "My path is the reason you were not torn apart by the enforcers you so graciously led on a tour of the entire valley." Malric ignored him, his focus entirely on me. "I could track your scent for miles, that strange mix of fire and him." He leaned in, his nose brushing against my neck, right over his mark. He inhaled deeply, a low growl of satisfaction rumbling in his chest. It was a purely animalistic gesture of reassurance, of reclaiming his territory. "This is the only scent that matters." His head lifted, and his lips were suddenly on mine. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a brand, hot, demanding, and utterly possessive. It was a kiss that tasted of blood, sweat, and triumph, a staking of his claim in a way that words never could. It was brutal and overwhelming, and a bolt of pure, unadulterated fire shot through me, straight from his mark to the tips of my toes. For a dizzying second, I was lost in the inferno, the ice in my veins turning to steam. My hands came up to fist in his torn shirt, my body instinctively arching into his. He broke the kiss as abruptly as he had started it, his forehead resting against mine, his breathing harsh. His golden eyes, blazing with victory and desire, held mine. "When I kill him," he rasped, his voice a low, guttural promise, "you will never feel the cold again." From across the cave there was no sound, but I could feel it. A wave of absolute soul-crushing cold emanating from Kaylin. It was not the biting chill of the air, but the profound, metaphysical cold of a silent, watching predator. It pushed back against Malric's heat, a quiet, insidious frost creeping back into my veins. Malric felt it too. He straightened up, turning to face his rival, pulling me behind him in a classic protective gesture. The two of them stood there, fire and ice, king of the sun and king of the shadows, with the blood moon just 3 nights away. And I stood between them, the heart of the hunted, my own heart a battlefield, torn between the king who offered me a crown of fire and the one who promised me a throne of ice. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any winter, that the end of their war would also be the end of me. The 3 days leading up to the blood moon were a fever dream of tension and survival. We remained in the cliffside cave, a tense triumvirate of silence and simmering conflict. Malric was a restless storm, pacing the confines of our small sanctuary, his raw energy too vast for the enclosed space. He would stare down at the valley, his knuckles white as he gripped the rock, a low growl, a constant hum in his chest. His wolf was close to the surface, yearning for the battle, for the release. Kalen was his opposite, a study in absolute stillness. He would sit for hours, meditating, his presence a pool of profound cold that seemed to drain the heat from the very air. He was honing his focus, sharpening his will into a weapon as deadly as any blade. And I was the fulcrum on which their animosity balanced. They shared what little food Malric had managed to hunt, a few tough mountain rabbits, in silence, tearing the meat from the bone with a primal intensity that reminded me they were more wolf than man. They watched each other's every move, every breath a challenge, every glance a threat. But they did not fight. It was an unspoken truce, a mutual understanding that their energy was to be conserved for the final bloody reckoning. My own transformation in those 3 days was subtle but profound. The constant warring push and pull of their auras was no longer just a source of pain. It was a forge. I learned to draw on Malric's fire when the gnawing cold of the cave and Kalen's proximity became too much, letting a wave of internal heat spread through my limbs. I learned to tap into Kalen's icy control when Malric's restless, aggressive energy threatened to overwhelm my senses, creating a shield of calm focus in my mind. I was learning to regulate the storm. I could not stop it, but I was no longer a helpless ship being tossed on its waves. I was learning to navigate, my senses sharpened to a preternatural degree. I could smell a storm front moving in from the west hours before the clouds gathered. I could hear the scuttling of a lizard on the rocks 100 feet below. It was as if their alpha senses were bleeding into me, gifting me a clarity I had never known. For the first time in my life, I felt the stirring of a predator's instincts within my own soul. I, the wolfless Omega, was beginning to feel the ghost of a wolf take shape within me, forged not of my own blood, but of their bonded animosity. On the third night, the night of the blood moon, a change came over the sky. The setting sun bled across the horizon in hues of bruised purple and violent orange. As darkness fell, the moon began to rise, and it was not the familiar silver orb of the huntress. It was a swollen, monstrous thing, the color of a fresh wound, bathing the world in a sanguine, apocalyptic light. The energy in the cave shifted, the simmering tension ignited. Malric rose to his feet, his body thrumming with power, his golden eyes reflecting the bloody moon. Kalen unfolded himself from his meditative state, his form seeming to draw in the shadows, his silver eyes like chips of obsidian. It was time. Without a word, they moved to the cave entrance. I followed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The descent down the cliff face was a blur of controlled power. They moved with a speed and certainty that was terrifying, and I was forced to match them, my own body responding with an agility I didn't know I possessed. We reached the valley floor and began the long, silent trek toward the plains of the old temple. The land under the blood moon was a nightmare landscape. The trees cast long, skeletal shadows, and the very air felt thick, heavy with the weight of ancient magic and spilled blood. As we emerged from the woods onto the vast, open plains, I saw that we were not alone. The packs were gathered, hundreds of them, Iron Fang and Shadow Fang, arrayed on opposite sides of the plain, a sea of grim faces and glittering eyes under the terrible red light. In the center of the plain stood the ruins of the old temple, its broken pillars like the bones of some long-dead beast, and standing before the ruins were the elders, Lyra at their head, her face a mask of grim duty. This was not just a duel. This was a sacred execution, and the world had come to bear witness. As we walked into the clearing, a sound rippled through the assembled wolves, a low collective growl of awe and dread. They parted before us, creating a path to the center. Malric walked with a warrior's swagger, his head held high, a silent promise of victory in his eyes. Kalen moved with a liquid grace, his expression unreadable, a specter of death in the bloody moonlight. I walked between them, the focal point of every stare, my borrowed strength the only thing holding me upright. We stopped before the elders. Lyra's gaze fell upon me, and her eyes widened in shock. She had expected to see a broken, terrified creature. She did not expect the woman who met her gaze without flinching, whose eyes held the reflected light of both fire and ice. "The law is absolute," Lyra intoned, her voice echoing in the unnerving silence. "Two alphas have marked one vessel. A curse has befallen us. The moon demands a blood price to restore the balance. Only one may walk away, only one bond may endure." She raised a ceremonial stone knife. "Let the trial of the blood moon commence." Malric and Kaelin moved to the center of the clearing, facing each other. The air crackled with their power. The ground itself seemed to vibrate. "After I kill you, I will burn this temple to the ground and salt the earth where your ancestors are buried," Malric snarled, his voice a low promise of annihilation. "Your threats are as empty as your skull," Kaelin replied, his voice calm and lethal. "You will die, and your pack will kneel to me. It is the way of things." They didn't wait for another word. They launched themselves at each other. The clash was apocalyptic. It was the sound of a landslide crashing into a glacier. Malric was all force and fury, his blows landing with the power to shatter bone. He shifted partially, claws extending, his teeth bared in a permanent snarl. He was a whirlwind of violent kinetic energy. Kaelin was his perfect antithesis. He did not meet force with force. He flowed around it. He was a blur of motion, redirecting Malric's brutal attacks, his own strikes precise and deadly, aimed at joints, tendons, the vulnerable points in his opponent's defense. I felt every blow as if it were landing on my own body. When Malric's claws raked across Kaelin's arm, drawing first blood, a line of searing cold erupted on my own arm. When Kaelin landed a vicious kick to Malric's ribs, a fiery agony exploded in my side, stealing my breath. The marks on my neck were twin novas of pain, a torment so absolute it brought me to my knees. The bonds were sympathetic to a degree I had never imagined. Their fight was literally tearing me apart. The crowd watched, mesmerized by the brutal ballet. They howled for their alphas, their bloodlust, a palpable wave of energy that washed over the plains. But I was locked in my own private hell, my body a voodoo doll for their mutual destruction. Malric was beginning to tire. His movements were becoming slower, his rage making him sloppy. Kaelin, by contrast, seemed untouched. He was a machine of death, his movements as precise as they had been at the start. He was winning. He was the cliff, and the wave was beginning to break. He saw an opening as Malric overextended on a wild swing. Kaelin ducked under the blow, his hand shooting out, not with a claw, but with fingers stiffened into a spear. He drove them into Malric's shoulder at the juncture of neck and collarbone. A roar of pure agony was torn from Malric's throat. He stumbled back, his arm hanging limp and useless at his side. The fiery mark on my neck pulsed with a pain so white-hot that my vision blurred. I could feel the severed nerves, the torn muscle, as if it were my own. Kaelin advanced, his silver eyes devoid of mercy. He was going for the killing blow. And in that moment, I knew I could not let it happen. I could not let either of them die. To lose one was to lose a part of the whole that I had become. To lose the fire would be to surrender to an eternity of ice. To lose the ice would be to be consumed by an uncontrollable inferno. No, the word was not spoken. It was a silent primal scream that erupted from the core of my soul. It was a command born of both their wills, but belonging to neither. It was mine. The energy that had thrown the elders back in my cell, that chaotic force of fire and ice, gathered inside me. But this time, it was not chaotic. This time, I could feel it. I could hold it. The pain from the two marks became a conduit, a source of fuel. I focused all of it, all the agony, all the power of the warring bonds, into a single point. I rose to my feet, my head thrown back, and I let it loose. A wave of visible power, a shimmering, incandescent ribbon of fire and frost, erupted from me. It shot across the clearing and slammed not into one alpha, but into both of them. They were thrown apart as if struck by lightning, landing in heaps on the dusty ground 10 feet from each other. The assembled packs cried out in shock, stumbling back from the sheer force of the blast. Silence. Utter, profound silence descended on the plains, broken only by the whistling of the wind. Even the blood moon seemed to hang motionless in the sky. Malric and Kaelin pushed themselves to their feet, their bodies bruised and bleeding, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. They stared, not at each other, but at me. I stood in the center of the dueling ground, my body trembling with the aftershock of the power I had unleashed. The torn silk of my gown whipped around me, and my hair, once a placid brown, seemed to shimmer with threads of both silver and gold in the moonlight. The marks on my neck were no longer just brands of ownership. They were glowing, one with the fierce light of a dying star, the other with the cold, dark light of a black hole. "The trial is over," I said, and my voice was not my own. It was a harmony of two tones, a melody of fire and a bass note of ice. It rang with an authority that silenced the entire world. I walked toward them, my bare feet steady on the blood-soaked ground. I stopped between them, turning to face the stunned elders and the two armies of wolves. "You speak of balance," I said, my voice carrying across the plains. "You demanded a blood price to restore it, but you were wrong. The old way of one alpha, one bond, is not balance. It is tyranny. This," I placed a hand over Malric's mark, feeling the searing heat, "is passion, strength, life." Then I placed my other hand over Kaelin's mark, feeling the profound, chilling calm. "And this is strategy, cunning, endurance." I looked out at the sea of faces, at the iron fangs and the shadow fangs, poised for a century more of war. To have one without the other is to be incomplete. A kingdom of pure fire will burn to ash. A kingdom of pure ice will shatter. You do not need one king. I let the power flow through me, a visible aura of shimmering heat and frost wrapping around me like a royal mantle. You need two. I turned, and for the first time, I met the gazes of the two most powerful alphas in the world. Not as a victim, not as a prize, but as their equal, and a queen to rule them both. 1 year later, the blood moon rose again. It filled the sky above the newly built Fortress of Unity, a structure of black iron fang stone and pale shadow fang marble, a testament to an impossible peace. I stood on the highest balcony, the cold night air a familiar caress on my skin. The moon's sanguine light did not fill me with the terror of a coming execution, but with a quiet, resonant power. It was the anniversary of my coronation, a coronation of blood, fear, and sheer, unadulterated will. The year had not been easy. It had been a grueling trial by fire and ice, a battle fought not with claws, but in tense councils, on disputed borders, and in the hearts of two proud, warring packs. There were whispers of abomination queen in the early months. There were assassination attempts, challenges to the new order from old, bitter warlords who could not stomach the thought of kneeling to a shared throne. Each challenge had been met. Each dissenter had been silenced. Not by brute force alone, nor by cold strategy, but by a unique and devastating combination of both. The bonds within me were no longer a war. They were a dance, a perfect, breathtakingly powerful harmony. Malric's mark, on my right, was a constant, steady warmth against my skin, a hearth of passion and unwavering strength that fueled my spirit. Kaelin's mark, on my left, was a cool, clear presence, a foundation of crystalline logic and silent endurance that focused my mind. They no longer pulled me apart. They held me together, making me stronger than any single alpha, any single queen could ever be. I was the nexus, the living embodiment of the peace they had all sworn to uphold. Heavy, confident footsteps announced his arrival. A blast of warmth preceded him, a familiar scent of pine, hot metal, and the man himself. Malric came to stand beside me, his massive frame a bulwark against the wind. He draped a heavy cloak of black wolf fur over my shoulders, his hands lingering there, his touch a familiar brand of possessive heat that now felt like home. "The moon is red again," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration against my back. "A year ago I would have torn the sky apart to get to him." His golden eyes followed my gaze to the horizon. There was still a fire in them, but it was no longer the wild, uncontrolled blaze of a conqueror. It was the steady, burning flame of a guardian. Now, the thought of this kingdom without his shadows to temper my sun, it is unthinkable. He had learned. The proud, impulsive king had learned that strength was not just about the charge, but about the foundation upon which one stood. He turned me to face him, his calloused hands framing my face. His kiss was still a brand, still full of a demanding heat, but it was no longer a claim of ownership. It was an act of worship. "My queen," he murmured against my lips, the words of vow he had remade every day for a year. A whisper of movement, a displacement of air, announced the other. Kaelin appeared at the other side of the balcony, a wraith in the bloody moonlight, as always. He held 2 goblets of dark, spiced wine, the steam rising from them in the cold air. He offered one to me, his long, pale fingers brushing mine. His touch was a familiar, grounding coolness. "The patrols from the northern ridge have returned," Kaelin said, his voice a calm counterpoint to Malric's heat. "The last of the old rebels have bent the knee. Lord Vorlog sends his fealty, and his head, should you wish it." Malric growled low in his throat. "Take it, let it be a message to any who would still question her reign." "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. Both alphas turned their full attention to me. "Send Lord Vorlog a pardon and a commission. His warriors are the best trackers in the north. We need his strength, not his head on a spike. We do not build a lasting peace on a foundation of fear." Kaelin's lips curved into that rare, subtle smile that never failed to make my heart stir. "As you command. Fire tempered with mercy, a wise decision, my queen." He raised his goblet to me, his frozen lake eyes holding a warmth that only I was ever allowed to see. Malric grumbled, but there was no real heat in it. He knew I was right. He took the other goblet from Kaelin's hand, a gesture that, a year ago, would have been an act of war. Now it was just a moment between the 2 pillars of my throne. They stood on either side of me, the 3 of us facing the moon. A perfect trinity of power. Malric's hand found my right hip, his heat seeping into my bones. Kaelin's hand rested on my left, a steadying, cool presence. Their power flowed into me, fire and ice, mingling within the crucible of my soul before flowing back out. A united front. I remembered the girl on the sacrificial stone, the broken, wolfless Omega, who believed she was an offering. She was a ghost, a memory of a creature who no longer existed. In her place stood a queen, forged in the heart of an impossible conflict. I was not half of one and half of the other. I was something new, made whole by the 2 halves of a fractured world. They had marked me to claim me. They had fought to own me. But in the end, it was I who had claimed them, my kings, my mates, my fire and my ice. I leaned my head back, accepting the weight of Malric's chin on my shoulder, and the light touch of Kaelin's temple against mine. The scent of pine and hoarfrost, of sun-warmed earth and winter stone, filled my senses. It was the scent of my life, the scent of my kingdom, the scent of my impossible, perfect love. Under the light of the blood moon, the curse had become a crown, and the Queen of 2 Thrones, at long last, was at peace.